Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the virtual 2020 Plus Program Expo, and this is Data Plus Room 3. Just want to say we're really proud of all the work that our students have done this summer under really exceptional circumstances, and we really hope that you enjoy hearing about their work. While the presentation's going on, I've got most people muted, so if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or use the chat box, and what the students will do is do about a 5-minute presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussion. So first this morning, we will have the Latinx group that is uncovering Latinx in social history, and that is Jackson Cooksey, Stephen Herrera, and Abdur Raymond. So I'm gonna go ahead and open the floor to them.
Thanks, Ariel. My name is Abdur Rahman, and together with Jackson and Stephen, I was on the team that looked at Latinx in the AltRight. So what is the AltRight? The AltRight is a network of loosely connected groups and individuals that support and advocate for white supremacy. In our project, we collected data to understand the intersection between AltRight and Latinx communities. Our goals were threefold. Firstly, we wanted to understand the size of the Latinx AltRight community. We also wanted to collect data to explore topics that appeal to members. And lastly, we wanted to visualize the Latinx AltRight networks on Twitter. For the data collection piece, which occupied most of our time, we collected data on the 5 of the most popular AltRight websites online. This includes Stormfront, of course, and Breitbart News. All in all, we collected about a gigabyte of articles and threads that span the last 3 decades. We also collected data from Twitter to do some exploratory network analysis.
Yeah, and so combining, some of these ideas about what we wanted to do with the text, because there was so much of it, we thought, an approach to doing this would be through topic modeling. So in this sense, for example, I decided to choose one thread from the Stormfront website called The Truth About Martin Luther King. And in looking at it, we wanted to combine all of that text and format it in a way that would help Professor Marquez try to understand, immediate results. What does this information mean? How does it compare to other threads within Stormfront? And how could this be understood across other different types of data sets? So in this sense, under exploratory data analysis, I just have 3 threads from the Stormfront website: Stormfront en Español y Portugués, which means Spanish and Portuguese, a thread about legal issues, and then another thread called The Truth About Martin Luther King. And as you can see, over time, they've had several posts happening consistently from before 2005 all the way up to 2020. And then on the right, what I decided to do, just to show an example of what we could do with all this data and all the different documents that we have, is an approach to topic modeling. So in this sense, I decided to use latent Dirichlet allocation, which basically uses a maximum likelihood estimate to determine which terms would be binned to how many topics we wanted to choose. So I decided to show today an example with k equals 9 topics and showing the top 10 terms for each topic. And I mean, it shows very interesting results. One of the results talks about, Catalunya, España, war, and things like that, which is really interesting in just looking at it.
Yeah, and we also wanted to try to understand the influence of the online alt-right by mapping alt-right spaces on Twitter. So the way we did that is we created network visualizations for a number of different Twitter users and their networks that surround the user. So if you look at the bottom, the network there is made up of nodes and edges, and the nodes are each individual Twitter user in the network. And the edges represent relationships between the users, such as follow or followee. And the way we analyze this is we calculated eigenvector centrality scores for each node in the network, and that's how we size them. So eigenvector centrality can measure how influential any node is in the network. And then we use force-directed algorithms to space out and map the network. So it calculates the closeness of any 2 nodes in the network, and acts like spring, the edges act like springs between them. So if you can see on the network, if any 2 nodes are closer than any other 2 nodes, then that means that they have more edges in common and relationships in common. And what we found was that not only are Latinx individuals influential relative to users in these networks, but there is also like a community within the subset of the alt-right on Twitter.
And just to summarize, we collected a bunch of data online. We used some common approaches in network analysis, like Jackson said, and topic modeling, like Steven just described. And we found some interesting results. Our topic models show how language can reveal latent themes. And we also saw how Spanish and Portuguese terms often allude to war and separatism, like with Catalonia. However, it's inherently subjective. The number of topics you select and the number of terms that you choose for each topic. It's also difficult to compare data across different types. So for instance, we looked at threads on Stormfront, but comparing them to tweets and articles is difficult. And lastly, we also had some issues with web scraping. For instance, with Breitbart News, you can only go back a year. Some of the websites, such as Stormfront, are difficult to scrape, and so forth. Moving forward, we would like to document our experiences, both the scraping and the modeling experience, to support future research into alt-right communities. Thank you very much.
All right, well, we'd like to open it up to some questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, feel free to either raise your hand or type it in the chat box. Okay, I got a question from Astrid. As a group, have you considered possible ways to connect to connected topic modeling and the network analysis? For instance, does the network change based on topic?
Yeah, it's something I thought a lot about. And for network analysis, there's like a whole other factor called like modularity and clustering that we wanted to look into, but it like the scale of it just like wasn't feasible for like our time span. And to do that, not only do you need like the relationships and connections between the nodes, which is like what I focused on, but you also need like another determining factor in order to like cluster groups into communities. So like if we had more time, then I feel like if we kind of collected or like merged the two of like the topic modeling and perform that on the tweets, then we can make like a metric that allows us to further categorize the networks for like a larger like space of a larger set of users, and then cluster that into communities on their own. So yeah, like that would be a vehicle to do that.
Thank you.
All right, got another question. How often do these groups talk about actual political activity over isolated ideologies?
Yeah, I think just in general, like with some of the examples that we have in the topic modeling, it was also mentioned that we do have subjective interpretations when we try to make sense of like how these words and terms are like been together. Throughout like just looking at Stormfront, which is gigantic, it's really, really large. Reading some of the posts, like it does span like several like weird topics, and there are like politically active in certain spaces. So I mentioned Stormfront in Espanol y Portugués. Like that thread is specifically for individuals that identify with Spain and Portugal. And you know, with the term Latinx, like that is often like a connected like topic of discussion, like where people from Latin America came from and how did they decide to, you know, racialize themselves as like white people from Spain or Portugal, and not in the sense, you know, individuals like Black and individuals from Latin America. Indigenous, sorry.
All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and unmute everybody. So if somebody has some follow-up to that, you can ask, unless you've decided to be, you know, muted. I'm curious, I have a question about, did you find there were certain groups that, or geographic areas that skewed more conservative than others in your work?
Yeah, I mean, just in kind of the space that we wanted to focus on for like the topic modeling, like we only decided to focus on these three. A lot of the times, like it was always connected, you know, to some individuals from like Florida or things like that, but we often found like it was very difficult to track individuals based on location. And it would be kind of confounding in trying to like show this and try to make sense of like where they're located, but it definitely was.
I guess not really like where they are now, but where they identify as having come from, like, you know, their, you know,
home.
a geographic identity, like, you know, what part of South America or other areas they may have, you know, originated from their families. And does that like skew more conservative in some areas or more liberal from some other areas, or, you know, for different groups? Or were you able to see that in the data you were looking at?
Yeah, I don't think we were necessarily able to see that in trying to find like, okay, if someone was from Mexico or someone was from Argentina, like would the conversation have been different and how they like construct themselves, like, you know, conservatively or not. So I would say not necessarily.
And one aspect that like we didn't, this wasn't really like within like the data realm of our project, but we did do a lot of like background research on like documentaries produced about Latinx people involved in the alt-right, and like other like journal articles. And a pretty common theme through all of them was that a lot of like the people, like Latinx people involved in like the alt-right come from places like Cuba or Venezuela, where like they fled like left-wing governments, and then came like to places like Florida and joined groups such as like the Proud Boys that are like white nationalist and other like, and definitely.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any pattern there actually. Okay, so we have a couple questions from some people on chat. Donald Pepka is asking what exactly constitutes an edge between two nodes, and do two nodes have to mutually interact with each other, or can it be one-sided?
So an edge between two nodes is, so if like one Twitter user follows another, then that's an edge. And the way that my graph is laid out is that like it's directed. So like if there's two users and one follows another, then that's one edge. And then if the second user follows the first user back, then that's another edge. So I used directive graphs because it made it easier to calculate eigenvector centrality and like influentialness. So yeah. So if there is like a mutual relationship between the two, it's just represented as two edges, not just one edge between the two.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Did you guys look at any other types of centrality for that network visualization besides eigenvector centrality?
I also calculated PageRank. It's like, my understanding is that it's like a variation on eigenvector centrality that was like developed by Google. And it resulted in like largely the same graph. I just used this one because it was simpler.
Thanks.
All right, we got a question from Eva Wheeler. She wanted to know if you got a sense of the size of the Latinx alt-right community overall.
I guess I can take this one. I mean, we attempted to try like more so with Jackson's like network visualization, like what that looked like with individuals that are like prominent, like on Twitter and things of that nature. But like when trying to make sense with all the data sets that we had, like with all the text, we didn't have necessarily enough time to construct kind of a more empirical analysis of like individuals that maybe self-identify as Latinx and then those that like kind of hint at it. It was very difficult, and we did attempt to at the very beginning, but we thought, you know, throughout the summer, we wanted to invest more time in making sure that Professor Marquez had a more like a thorough like data set to work on for like future research. And we just decided to show an example of like what that could look like with topic modeling.
All right, I've got another question. Out of the tools that this team used this summer to do your work, were there any that you didn't know about before Data Plus that you had to learn basically over the summer?
Or I
say absolutely.
Yeah.
Before Data Plus, like I had no like coding experience like whatsoever. So I basically tried to teach myself like Python in the month preceding Data Plus, and then use that throughout the entire summer. And then also other tools associated with like network analyses, like Gephi, which is like the program for visualizing networks and stuff like that. So
you didn't know any of that before
this summer, and how do you feel about it now? You feel pretty comfortable?
With Python, oh, definitely. Like I'm really comfortable with Python now, and it's kind of been like cool to like watch myself grow like into being able to like code more easily, especially for like stuff like data scraping. And I'm very familiar with the Twitter API now, so that's good.
Awesome. How about the other team members?
Yeah, I think for me, the web scraping, I mean, I did have like some prior knowledge and experience like doing it, but not to the extent of like what I had to do this summer. And I definitely had to learn like the G sub function in R, which is just nightmarish almost, because you are working with text and you want it to look nice and clean. But it was fun for the most part learning, and it felt like an entirely new language. So.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just add, I learned the library Scrappy, which is a big upgrade from Beautiful Soup. And I think I learned more from challenges that came up. So for instance, Facebook started banning us. Initially, we tried to get data from Facebook. They started doing user agent blocking, so getting around that, or like concurrency limitations. So some websites not allowing sort of asynchronous scraping, so getting around that. So I think that's where I learned the most.
That's great. That's great. I did have one other question about this project. Did the goal or direction of the project change from the get-go after like you guys started meeting and getting together? Did you kind of change like the way you wanted to work this summer and what you wanted to work on? And if so, how did that come about?
I can talk a little. So I think Professor Marquez kind of gave us like a blank slate at the beginning of the summer and said like here's a topic and like here are some things that I'm like thinking about you guys doing, but like really she like allowed us to like take the reins and kind of explore like what was interesting to us. And so from the beginning we kind of had like an idea of what we wanted to do in terms of like topic modeling and data wrangling and stuff like that, but like the ways in which we went about it were like radically different from the beginning and at the end. And like Abdur mentioned, like he got banned from Facebook for like doing too many polls or something. So we kind of adjusted to that like as we went along, and like the form or the method of it changed. But I'd say like we were working the same umbrella pretty much the entire time, but like we were able to be flexible within that. So.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
This project was actually originally intended to be looking at U.S. Census data and investigating how Latinx people are moving or living in the South. So this was like, when the summer started, this was a very different project. And we realized pretty early on that we weren't going to be able to get the type of census data that we wanted. So when we realized that project wasn't possible, we changed directions completely to another kind of really early stage idea that Cecilia had. So this was like hard. This was just like a little start of an idea. So they kind of started with nothing, and then we're able to like generate all of this data and do visualizations and stuff. So it actually came a long way from having almost no form at the beginning.
Yeah. I will confess, on the back end, I did see the original proposal, so I do know there was a shift in how you guys did this. But actually, I think this is a lot more interesting in a lot of ways. There's a question from Nick Datto here. In response to Trump's pretty directly xenophobic comments towards the Latinx communities, how do Latinx alt-right members separate themselves from those comments?
Yeah, I think, really early on, like someone mentioned about like, the Proud Boys and kind of like, in that sense, it's more of this like chauvinist, Western chauvinist like mindset. And in addition to that, like war was a pretty strong topic discussed just in general. Even in the topic modeling, like I don't want to make any objective like, statements, but just right here, some of them talk about like guerra, which means war in Spanish, like Auschwitz, the Holocaust, and kind of like making like those direct comparisons with like, you know, locations in like Venezuela or Cuba, where they have like more like left-winged governments and forms of like economic prosperity. So that I feel like tends to be the way that individuals like, you know, are okay with kind of like those pretty xenophobic and like racist comments, because it's like very, I would say, relatively difficult to try to, you know, make sense of that, and then also at the same time like not realize like, oh, maybe like Trump's statements like have something to do related to like war or kind of like these more radical like situations, but they're still xenophobic.
All right, well, we're pretty much at the end of this session. Are there any other follow-up questions? All right. Well, I just want to thank you guys. This was really interesting and yeah, really nice presentation. I agree. And yeah, thanks so much for your hard work this summer. And yeah, well, please feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions for the team. I'll make sure they get answered.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Please do check out the other rooms today. In 9 minutes, we'll have Protecting American Investors. So if you want to come back to this room, we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.